I am the programs director and just wanted, if you haven't met me, I'm Misty Walser. If anybody has someone that they've heard speak before and you'd really like to have them here with us, drop me a line, come talk to me after the meeting, and I'd love to get suggestions for our speakers. Today's speaker came highly suggested. Everyone that has told me about her, I haven't got to hear her personally, but everyone has told me that she does an excellent job and that she's one of their favorite speakers to come here. Yeah. So Jennifer Archer is a writer, editor, publisher for over 20 years. She has written, proofread, edited, critiqued, and helped develop numerous novels, nonfiction manuscripts, corporate and personal histories, synopsis, articles, blogs, so she pretty much does everything. She has written herself 11 novels and 3 novellas of her own for Harper Teen, Warner Books, Harlequin, and Leser Books. She also has self-published a nonfiction book and a children's picture book. You do a little bit of everything. Yes. Jennifer's published novels have been nominated for the Romance Writers America's Reader Award, the Romantic Times Book Club Reviewers' Choice Award. The Texas Library Association selected her debut young adult novel, Through Her Eyes, for the first Spirit of Texas Reading Program. How do you say that? Tayshia's for the high school reading list. You knew what I was stuck on. Jennifer has taught numerous workshops on writing and was an instructor for 2 summers at the West Texas Writers Academy at WTA&M. She holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from West Texas State University, which is now WTA&M. Jennifer co-owns Archer Writing and Editing Service with her son Ryan. Visit their website. Give a hand for
Hello, everybody. I have a very weak voice, so if you can't hear, just raise your hand and I'll yell. And thank you for coming today. A great crowd. Are you all awake?
Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm also technologically challenged, so we're going to see if this will work, and if not, everything that you need to know will be on your handout. So if you don't have a handout, let me know and I'll make sure you get a handout. Okay. First of all, see if I can do this, Ryan. I chose, when I was trying to think about what to talk about today, I wanted to do something that you don't often hear a lot about. And I've touched on subtext before when I was teaching at the WT Writers Academy, but just a little bit. And when I started researching for this presentation, I realized what a difficult topic this is to try to explain. So hopefully I'm sure you all have an idea of what subtext is, but the hard part is figuring out how to put it into your fiction. Because, by its very nature, subtext is kind of invisible. It's supposed to be exactly what it says, beneath the text, okay? It's all of these things. All of these things basically say the same thing, and hopefully one of these will resonate with you. But it's an additional layer of meaning inferred by the text, but not accessible without a bit of thinking. It is more than words alone can say. It's implication, nuance, contrast, deception, suspense, symbolism. It's when meaning is hidden and when the reader has to go beneath the surface and make connections and interpretation, then text becomes subtext. Meanings which are insinuated but not spelled out in the text of the story. So by its very nature, subtext is invisible. So how do you figure out how to put something that's invisible into your fiction? It's a difficult thing to explain. So the way I'm going to do this is give you examples from movies and a book. I chose movies mainly because more of us have seen the same movies than read the same books. So I'm hoping that all of you have seen, or a lot of you anyway, have seen the movie Casablanca, the old 1940s movie. Is there anybody here who hasn't seen it? Okay, she hasn't. I'm going to give y'all some background on that for those of you that haven't seen it, and also just to refresh your memory if you have. The other movie that I'm going to be referring to a lot is The Sixth Sense. Who hasn't seen The Sixth Sense? Okay, most of you have. I'll also give background on that. And the book that I'm going to be referring to is The Giver by Lois Lowry. Whoops, there went my screen. Let's see here. We jumped ahead. Ryan, we're going to have to go back. Okay. Who has not read The Giver by Lois Lowry? Okay, a few of you. I'll give you some background on that as well. And I'm going to do that right off the bat, just so that we can get into this a little bit faster. So Casablanca. Casablanca is the story of Rick Blaine, who is the Humphrey Bogart character, and he's a cynical, world-weary American expatriate who runs a nightclub in Casablanca, Morocco, during the early stages of World War II, while America remained neutral. Despite the pressure he receives from local authorities, Rick's Cafe has become a haven for refugees seeking to obtain illicit letters of transit that will help them escape the Nazis and go to America. But when Elsa, a former lover of Rick's, and her fugitive husband show up to his cafe one day, Rick struggles to decide whether or not he should help them escape. Okay, so that's Casablanca. The Sixth Sense. A psychologist is shot one night in his home by an intruder who was once his patient and feels he was wrongly treated. The man then turns the gun on himself. Months later, the psychologist, who appears healed in body but not in spirit, takes on a new case, a boy named Cole, who claims to see dead people. The psychologist hopes he can get it right this time and help the boy, as he couldn't help the man who shot him. The psychologist is also suffering because, since the shooting, his wife seems to be drifting into an affair and doesn't seem to hear him when he talks. Okay, some of y'all know why. The Giver by Lois Lowry is a YA novel. And if you haven't read it, you need to go home and read The Giver. It's a classic. And if you haven't seen Casablanca and The Sixth Sense, you need to go home and watch those too, because they're great movies. And then you can take what we talk about today and you can you can see the subtext real clearly. The Giver is set in a future time, and a 12-year-old boy named Jonas lives in a perfect world, in a perfect community. Everything is under control. In his community, there's no war, no fear or pain. There are no choices. There is also no pleasure, and everything is literally seen in black and white. The community must abide by strict rules. Every person is assigned a role in the community at age 12. When Jonas is 12, he is assigned to become the community's receiver and gets special training from the prior receiver, an old man who will now become the Giver. The Giver alone holds the memories of true pain and of life's true pleasures and pain. Now it's time for Jonas to receive them. There's no turning back. Okay, so those are the three main stories that we're going to look at today. So there's two types of subtext. I can't keep my stuff straight here. The first is macro subtext, okay? And it comes from the story as a whole. And by that, we can take Casablanca as an example. It comes from the story as a whole rather than from individual scenes or from the character's words or behavior. It usually results from the interaction of the story and its culture, making it harder for authors to control it. It's not something that most writers invent consciously, since it relies too much on outside factors. And it usually relies on readers having a certain level of knowledge in their background that allows them to get it. Okay, if you think about Casablanca, I wanted to show you a little thing of it, but I don't know if this is going to work. I don't think it is. I had a little video.
Just give it, I think it'll load in a second. Maybe not.
Let's see. The video clips might not work, and that's fine, because we don't really need them. They were just for fun. Back to macro. Macro subtext we can look at Casablanca to kind of explain what that is. And what it is, the story was set in the days right before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, okay? And the movie came out almost a year after Pearl Harbor was bombed. So the subtext, if you saw that movie right when it came out or for years shortly after that, viewers were gonna have in the back of their mind that after that movie ended, Pearl Harbor was bombed a few days later. So that was the subtext that they brought to that movie. They knew that. Now the characters in the movie, of course, didn't know that Pearl Harbor was going to be bombed in a few days, and but the viewers brought that with them to the movie. Okay, they had that knowledge, so they got a different subtext than say a 20-year-old that might see that movie today, and they're not as don't have the bombing of Pearl Harbor as fresh in their mind, or, you know, I hate to say it, but today a lot of kids don't know history. So they would bring a different thing to that. Whereas the viewers that know about Pearl Harbor being bombed after the movie ended, they would bring a subtext to it where they know that Rick represents the United States. He is a man who wants to stay out of the war. He's neutral. The little clip I was going to show you is him at his cafe, and he's meeting with two other men, and they ask him what his nationality is, and he says, "I'm a drunkard," because he doesn't want to have a nationality. He doesn't want to take sides in the war. He wants to stay out of it. And that was the way the United States was as well. We were trying to stay neutral at that time. So the subtext is that a viewer from that time period, or even, you know, people today that are familiar with Pearl Harbor, as we all are, brings that to the movie, and that becomes subtext. He is a symbol of the United States. Okay. So that came from the story as a whole, and by that I mean that the writers of that movie probably didn't say, "I'm going to set this in the days before Pearl Harbor's bombed so that it'll have this subtext." It's just that when they chose that time period, that subtext came along with it. Okay, it was out of the writer's control. It was just part of what came with that time period and choosing that for their story. Okay. Then there is micro subtext. Micro subtext, writers have more control over it. It can be more consciously added to your stories, and we'll talk about that a little more later when we get into how to add subtext to your stories. The reader brings a more complete viewpoint to reading the passage. And they come away with a meaning that is more than what's contained in the text, okay? So as an example, and I really wish this would play.
Can you click on it on the, I'll see if I can. Oh, no, that's fine. It'll come back. Oh, not that one?
No, not that one.
That's okay, I'll let it go. Okay. Let's see if I can. I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
Next year, we will need a new technology person to replace Ryan. He is resigning, or he is ending his term. We will need somebody, and if you know someone who's good with technology, because that is something our organization needs. Even though Ryan's very good, I'm okay.
We don't have to see the clip. I'm sure probably most of you, if you watch TV at all, have you seen the Matthew McConaughey commercials for Lincoln?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to play a video clip of, maybe it's going to play here. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, I don't have to. Oh.
Yeah.
It looks like it will, I don't know why. You'll need that later.
And I go, Mom, and I hear it in the background, she's watching it too, saying, and this is where it's coming, Mom.
I think so too, actually.
Sweetheart.
Yes.
I've never seen that before. I've never seen that before. Okay,
Ooh.
all right. When you're Matthew McConaughey, even your commercials have subtext, okay? This commercial, we're gonna talk about it in terms of micro subtext. It's contained within the story and scenes and passages. Okay, there were 3 main scenes in the commercial. We first see him at a table, and he's got, he's telling a story, and he has the rapt attention of everybody at the table. Then the next scene, we see him leaving that room, going somewhere else, and he stays behind in a room with a pool table and plays pool. Then the next scene is him leaving the party alone and driving off. Okay, so those are scenes that each scene has subtext, which we'll go over here in a second. It mostly requires subtext, micro subtext, not outside knowledge of culture and history, but inside knowledge of the characters or earlier plot events. Okay, we all know Matthew McConaughey. We know what he's a cool cat. He's a cool dude. He's confident. So we come into it knowing that that's Matthew McConaughey. The story adds layers of meaning to who he is. And those layers counter or challenge or enhance the text of the story. And it often leads the reader to deduce a character's internal conflict or mindset before he does. Okay, so let's take those scenes. First, we see him at a table, and he's telling a story, and he has everybody's attention. What subtext do you get from that? Anybody? He's got what? Control of the room, okay? And then the next scene is he's at, stays behind in a room, everybody else leaves at a pool table, and he makes a shot, and it's a great shot, a crazy shot, and he makes it. What's the subtext?
He has control of the pool table.
He has control of the table. And then the next shot is, he's leaving, he kind of has a smug little grin on his face, and he gets in his car and drives off. And what is the subtext?
He's still in control.
He has control of the road or control of the car. So each one of those scenes has subtext, but the story overall has subtext too. So what is the subtext that the people that make Lincoln want you to get from that?
Better control of the vehicle.
Say that again?
Better control of the vehicle.
Well, better control of the
And
vehicle.
if you drive a Lincoln, you own everything on the road.
Okay, if you own a Lincoln, you'll own everything on the road. Or maybe if you own a Lincoln, you'll be as cool as Matthew McConaughey and be in control. So that was full of micro subtext. Each scene had its own subtext. It was the same in every scene. But then the overall, those linked together and made the story as a whole have a subtext as well. Okay, it also added layers of meaning to Matthew McConaughey as being, not just a cool dude, but a guy who's in control, okay? So it enhanced the text and added layers of meaning. It often leads the reader to deduce internal conflict or mindset. In this case, I would say his mindset, that smug little smile he had, that he's a winner, okay? So, that's micro subtext. Okay, now we're gonna talk a little bit about the purpose of micro subtext. Okay. For plot, you can have micro subtext that enhances your plot, and you can have it that enhances a character. And so first, we're gonna talk about plot, and we're gonna see if this next little will play.
You'll,
This is a clip from The Sixth Sense. And the I want to tell you my secret now. I see dead people. Okay. He sees dead people. So, we're gonna look at that in terms of micro subtext for plot. First, let's go over a little bit of it. The purpose of micro subtext for plot, it can set up a plot device. A plot device is an object or character or situation in a story whose purpose is to advance the plot of the story, or alternatively, to overcome some difficulty in the plot, okay? In The Sixth Sense, when the boy says, I see dead people, it's not revealed to the viewer that, I'm gonna spoil the movie for some of you, that the psychologist is actually a dead person, okay? He's dead. And it's not revealed, I'm not quite sure if the boy even knows he's dead, because he's not an obvious dead person like some of the others are in the movie. So, the writer of The Sixth Sense set up that as a plot device for the boy, the boy to see dead people, and the psychologist, tries to help him. And hidden beneath his line of dialogue, I see dead people, is the subtext, okay? It sets up a plot device that moves that story forward, and it affects everything in the movie. It also gives a clue to that secret. In that movie, there are multiple clues that most of the people that watched the movie for the first time when it first came out did not pick up on. But the clues are there, and once you know that he's dead, if you go back and watch the movie, then you can very easily see those clues. For one thing, there's a scene, one of the things is that nobody other than the boy looks at the psychologist. Nobody other than the boy talks to the psychologist. And a third really brilliant clue is that the writers wrote it in such a way and the director directed it in such a way that it appears when there's somebody else in the room with the psychologist other than the boy, it appears as if they're interacting. You can take, if you want to watch that movie again, if you take those scenes that the psychologist is in with somebody besides the boy, and you remove the other person, you remove the psychologist, the scene still makes sense. For instance, there's one scene where he's with his wife in a restaurant, and he comes in and she seems to be angry, and you think she's angry because he's late and it's their anniversary. And he's talking to her and she doesn't answer or look at him, but it looks as though she's just, ignoring him because she's mad at him. And if you take him out of that scene, it's just a woman who's sitting there, upset and crying, and it still works. So that's one clue that was put into that story that a lot of people didn't pick up on at first. Another time, the psychologist is with his wife again, and it's toward the end of the movie, and she's trying to go to sleep, and her eyes are closed, and he's sitting looking at her right next to her, and she whispers, "Why did you leave me?" And he answers her, but she still doesn't respond or open her eyes. Now, if you remove him from that scene, she's just a woman, alone, trying to go to sleep and grieving that her husband's gone and asking why he left. So, the scene still works. So micro subtext for plot can drop a clue, for you to pick up on. And there's a lot of those in The Sixth Sense. So that's a good one to watch, to pick up on how to drop those clues. Okay, there's a third scene too I want to talk about. It's the psychologist and the boy's mother, and they're sitting, I think, in her living room waiting for the boy to come home from school. And the scene starts with them already sitting there with each other. And they don't speak to each other, they don't look at each other. The mother seems very worried and upset and is watching the clock. And as the viewer, you just assume they've already said, spoken to each other when he arrived, but we weren't privy to that. But again, you remove him from the scene, and it's just a nervous mom, waiting for her child to come home. So, works very well. Okay. The purpose of micro subtext for plot continued. It can foreshadow a coming event. Foreshadowing in The Sixth Sense. At the very beginning of the movie, it opens with the psychologist and his wife coming home from a dinner, and they don't realize that someone has broken into their home, and it's a man that the psychologist used to treat when he was a child. And the man feels as if he did not get good treatment, and he shoots the psychologist and then turns the gun on himself. And then the screen fades to black. And then it opens up again with, it says, I can't remember if it says months later or fall or something. So time has passed. And then it's the psychologist meeting with this boy for the first time. And that fade to black is really a foreshadowing. We don't know what happened, between the time, those months in between, when he was shot and when he has this new patient, this little boy that he's going to treat. But we read the subtext and we think that he's fine, he recovered. So that is foreshadowing. In that case, we read it wrong. But the writer of the movie wanted that to be the subtext you took away. They wanted to fool people, so it worked. In the book, The Giver, there's also a lot of foreshadowing. In that book, children are given a bicycle at the age of 9 years old. And so there are many scenes of Jonas, the main character, riding his bike, and he feels a sense of freedom when he rides that bike. And that is foreshadowing that he is going to escape and find his freedom. There's another really interesting scene where he and another child are throwing an apple back and forth to each other, and everybody in the community sees in black and white. And when the apple's coming toward Jonas, it turns red, and he sees color for the first time. And that actually has kind of two different foreshadowings, and one is, the fall from grace that an apple represents, with the Adam and Eve story. He eventually, when he starts to learn more things about how the community is run, he starts to break the rules and has, falls from grace within his community. It's also a foreshadowing that he will become the next receiver, because he sees things differently than everybody else in the community. He has that ability. Micro subtext for plot can also connect a skein of events, and that's what the Lincoln commercial did. It connected all those different scenes to have one overall subtext. Is there any questions? The purpose of micro subtext for character, okay? We built plot, now we're gonna go to character. It hints at an internal conflict, okay? For instance, the scene in The Giver. There's a scene in The Giver that shows internal conflict as the giver is teaching Jonas to take over his role as the receiver. I'm gonna read you that scene. Sorry, my mouth is dry. See if you can find internal conflict in one or both of the characters as I read this. And this is after Jonas has been, let's see here, has met with the receiver a couple of times. So the receiver that's now the giver. What happened 10 years ago, Jonas asked. Oh, I know, you tried to train a successor and it failed. Why? The giver smiled grimly. When the new receiver failed, the memories that she had received were released. They didn't come back to me. He paused and seemed to be struggling with the concept. I don't know exactly. They went to the place where memories once existed before receivers were created, someplace out there. He gestured vaguely with his arm, and then the people had access to them. Apparently, that's the way it was once. Everyone had access to memories. It was chaos, he said. They really suffered for a while. Finally, it subsided as the memories were assimilated, but it certainly made them aware of how they need a receiver to contain all that pain and knowledge. But you have to suffer like that all the time, Jonas pointed out. The giver nodded. And you will. It's my life. It will be yours. Jonas thought about it, about what it would be like for him, along with walking and eating, and he looked around at the wall of books. Reading, that's it? The giver shook his head. Those are simply the things that I do. My life is here. In this room? The giver shook his head. He put his hands to his own face, to his chest. No, here, in my being, where the memories are. My instructors in science and technology have taught us how the brain works, Jonas told him eagerly. It's full of electrical impulses. It's like a computer. If you stimulate one part of the brain with an electrode, he stopped talking. He could see an odd look on the giver's face. They know nothing, the giver said bitterly. Jonas was shocked. Since the first day in the annex room, they had together disregarded the rules about rudeness, and Jonas felt comfortable with that now. But this was different and far beyond rude. This was a terrible accusation. What if someone had heard? He glanced quickly at the wall speaker, terrified that the committee might be listening as they could at any time. But as always during their sessions together, the switch had been turned to off. Nothing, Jonas whispered nervously. But my instructors. The giver flicked his hand as if brushing something aside. Oh, your instructors are well trained. They know their scientific facts. Everyone is well trained for his job. It's just that without the memories, it's all meaningless. They gave that burden to me, and to the previous receiver and the one before him. And back and back and back, Jonas said, knowing the phrase that always came. The giver smiled, though his smile was oddly harsh. That's right, and next it will be you, a great honor. Yes, sir, they told me that at the ceremony, the very highest honor. Okay, so did you detect any internal conflict in the giver? Any ways that his words didn't really back up, or his actions didn't really back up his words?
Pain versus
So what?
the pain versus the honor.
Okay, pain versus the honor. Also, he seemed his bitter tone when he said, they don't know anything. Also, I thought his reluctance to tell, he kind of had a reluctance, I think, to tell Jonas the truth, but yet at the same time, he gave him hints that it really isn't the great honor. He's been led to believe it is. And did you sense also internal conflict in Jonas? Yeah, he's been taught to believe whatever, the adults in his world tell him. So I felt like a struggle between his wanting to believe what he's been told, but yet he's kind of getting a different sense from the giver. So that's micro subtext. Micro subtext can also contrast perception and reality, which that did as well. Another contrast in perception and reality that we see in the giver is Jonas's father. On the outside, the facade he presents, or that we get to see of him as a reader, he's a very caring person, kind of a gentle man. His role in the community is to be a nurturer, which is, he takes care of the newborn babies before they're assigned a family. And so we see that in him. But I'm going to read you another just short passage and see if you don't see kind of a contrast between a hint, also a clue that's dropped, and then a contrast in how we perceive him as he's described, and then what we perceive the subtext is saying. This is at the dinner table, and they always talk about, in the evening, everybody gets a chance to talk about their day. Jonas listened politely. They're not very, can you hear? Jonas listened politely, though not very attentively, while his father took his turn, describing a feeling of worry that he'd had that day at work, a concern about one of the new children who wasn't doing well. Jonas's father's title was nurturer. He and the other nurturers were responsible for all the physical and emotional needs of every new child during its earliest life. It was a very important job. Jonas knew that, but it wasn't one that interested him much. What gender is it, Lily, his sister asked. Male, father said. He's a sweet little male with a lovely disposition, but he isn't growing as fast as he should, and he doesn't sleep soundly. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the committee's beginning to talk about releasing him. Oh no, Mother murmured sympathetically. I know how sad that must make you feel. Jonas and Lily both nodded sympathetically as well. Release of new children was always sad because they hadn't had a chance to enjoy life within the community yet, and they hadn't done anything wrong. Okay. One more paragraph. There were only 2 occasions of release which were not punishment. Release of the elderly, which was a time of celebration for a life well and fully lived, and release of a new child, which always brought a sense of what could we have done. This was especially troubling for the nurturers like father, who felt they had failed somehow, but it happened very rarely. Okay, do you get a hint there of what a release is? I don't tell you what it is, but you get a hint that if a baby is not thriving and they don't think it's going to grow up to be somebody that can contribute to the community, then the child is killed. And so there's a real contrast between the outside perception we're given of Jonas's father and this gentle nurturer, and the reality of what he does in his job. But that's not brought out. You don't really learn for certain what a release is until way far into the book. And Jonas doesn't know what a release is. So it's always talked about, but it's never really explained to the people in the community what actually happens. So, a contrast of perception and reality. Okay, and micro subtext for character can also show self-deception. And a lot of times that's when you have a character and they're repeating something over and over again, almost like they're trying to convince themselves it's true. For instance, after receiving a memory of what Christmas was once like, which they don't have Christmas in Jonas's world anymore, so he has no idea what that is. But the giver gives him a memory of a Christmas from hundreds of years back, and he talks to the giver about it. And I'm going to read that passage and see if you can't detect him trying to deceive himself. It will come to you. Who were the old people? Why were they there? It had puzzled Jonas seeing them in the room. The old of the community did not ever leave their special place, the house of the old, where they were so well cared for and respected. They were called grandparents, said the giver. Grandparents. It means parents of the parents, long ago. Back and back and back. Jonas began to laugh. So actually, there could be parents of the parents of the parents of the parents. The giver laughed too. That's right. It's a little like looking at yourself, looking in a mirror, looking at yourself, looking in a mirror. Jonas frowned. But my parents must have had parents. I never thought about it before. Who are my parents of the parents? Where are they? You could go look in the Hall of Open Records. You'd find the names. But think, son, if you apply for children, then who will be their parents of the parents? Who will be their grandparents? My mother and father, of course. And where will they be? Jonas thought. Oh, he said slowly, when I finish my training and become a full adult, I'll be given my own dwelling. And then when Lily does, a few years later, she'll get her own dwelling and maybe a spouse and children if she applies for them. And then mother and father. That's right. As long as they're still working and contributing to the community, they'll go and live with the other childless adults, and they won't be part of my life anymore. And after that, when the time comes, they'll go to the house of the old, Jonas went on. He was thinking aloud, and they'll be well cared for and respected, and when they're released, there will be a celebration, which you won't attend, the giver pointed out. No, of course not, because I won't even know about it. By then, I'll be so busy with my own life, and Lily will too. So our children, if we have them, won't know who their parents of the parents are either. It seems to work pretty well that way, doesn't it? The way we do it in our community, Jonas asked. I just didn't realize there was any other way until I received that memory. It works, the giver agreed. Jonas hesitated. I certainly like the memory, though. I can see why it's your favorite. I couldn't quite get the word for the whole feeling of it. The feeling that was so strong in the room. Love, the giver told him. Jonas repeated it. Love. It was a word and concept new to him. They were both silent for a minute. Then Jonas said, Giver, yes, I feel very foolish saying this. Very, very foolish. No need, nothing is foolish here. Trust the memories and how they make you feel. Well, Jonas said, looking at the floor, I know you don't have the memories anymore because you gave it to me, so maybe you won't understand this. I will. I'm left with a vague wisp of that one, and I have many other memories of families and holidays and happiness, of love. Jonas blurted out what he was feeling. I was thinking that, well, I can see that it wasn't a very practical way. It wasn't a very practical way to live, with the old right there in the same place, when maybe they wouldn't be well taken care of the way they are now, and that we have a better arranged way of doing things. But anyway, I was thinking, feeling actually, that it was kind of nice then, and that I wish we could be that way, and that you could be my grandparent. The family and the memory seemed a little more, he faltered, not able to find the word he wanted, a little more complete, the giver suggested. Jonas nodded. I liked the feeling of love, he confessed. He glanced nervously at the speaker on the wall, reassuring himself that no one was listening. I wish we still had that, he whispered. Of course, he added quickly, I do understand that it wouldn't work very well, and that it's much better to be organized the way we are now. I can see that it was a dangerous way to live, okay? So do you see how he keeps jumping back and forth, trying to, repeating himself that, I like this, but I know our way's better. He doesn't want to get in trouble by saying the wrong thing, which would be that they're not handling it right or living the right way. So that is him, showing a little bit of self-deception, trying to deceive not only the giver, but himself, that their way is the best way, okay? And this ties right into, it reveals a narrator is unreliable. And I don't know if you've noticed, but unreliable narrators are a big thing in fiction right now, especially adult fiction. Lots of books coming out with that. And often the narrator that's unreliable will push something one step too far. For instance, what if a woman tells her husband that her best friend saw him in a neighboring town yesterday, and why was he there? She didn't know he was going there. And he said, yeah, so I took a little road trip. No reason really, I just felt like driving. Sometimes I do that to clear my head, no big deal. Do I have to tell you what I do every second of the day? I took a little road trip. So he's pushing the excuses like one step too far, and you get the sense what he's lying. He's unreliable. So, and also unreliable narrators, a lot of times their actions don't back up what they say their goal is. So that's another way another purpose if you want to have a unreliable narrator. Okay. how subtext makes readers and co-creators of meaning within a story. And I'm just gonna go over this real quickly. In a way, subtext does make your readers co-creators. As weird as that sounds, and it's because they bring their own knowledge into play when there's subtext, like we talked about in Casablanca. You know, they brought knowledge of Pearl Harbor being bombed, but that story's different, slightly different for different people that watch it. Because if you're watching it for the first time right now and you're 25 years old, you might not pick up on that subtext. It might just be a love story set against the background of war, and you don't pick up on the subtext of Pearl Harbor is going to be bombed in 3 days, and you don't pick up on the fact that Rick represents the United States. So every reader brings their own knowledge into play when they're reading, especially when they have to get involved and figure things out because it's left unsaid, it's just hinted at, and so that kind of makes them a co-creator in the story. And they also contrast character action with their own experience. For instance, say you're reading something and the character's 17, and the way they handle that, the situation they're in, happened to you too, but you handled it completely differently. So a lot of times I know when I'm reading something, I kind of project a different way the plot could go. You know, I wouldn't have handled it that way, I would have done this. And so when that subtext is there and you're trying to figure out what's not seen in the story, what the message is, a lot of times you create a whole different story of how it could go in your head. They interpret and translate dialogue, and that's the "he thinks you do protest too much" kind of thing. When, like the man who was trying to convince his wife that he was not doing anything wrong when he took his road trip. So the dialogue is delivered very repetitive and kind of in a tone of trying to convince. They scout ahead and project what they think will happen. And that again is astute readers, and I know all writers in here are readers. We all do that. We try to figure out how we're gonna, how the story's gonna end, and sometimes we'll make up a whole alternate plot line. They flip back, for instance, if they see a character say something on page 100 that doesn't jive with what they said in the beginning of the book, they'll flip back and then start making the character into what they think they are. And again, they bring their own cultural background to the interpretation of a character's actions or to the story in general. For instance, Casablanca would probably have a very different meaning to a Japanese citizen who was living during World War II than it would to an American that was living back then. Okay, how much, is it break time, or I don't have a watch? Okay, let's take a look.
Great.